All right, so I hope everyone's having a great day. My name is David Caesar. Let me stop the screen share so you can see who we are. Anyhow, my name is David Caesar. I'm the lead agronomist at Agritecture Consulting, and I'm very excited to be hosting this webinar today with a friend, Juan Whiting, and we're going to talk about grant funding for farms. And so just as a really quick intro of Juan, and he can talk more about himself, but Juan is the unique combination of having farming experience and a grant writer. So I've applied for a lot of grants in my life, some by myself, some with grant writers. And unfortunately, a lot of the grant writers I've worked with have had zero or very, very limited knowledge about agriculture. And so it's really my pleasure to introduce everyone to Juan, who is a farmer and understands about how to get grants from an agricultural perspective. And he has been successful, I think, in raising or obtaining more than $30 million in grants for farmers. So not 30,000, $30 million in grants for farmers. So someone to pay very close attention to. So Juan, maybe just give a little bit intro of yourself. Thank you so much for joining us, and tell us how you got into grant writing.
Thanks for having me, David. I'm excited to be talking about grants today. Just kind of to introduce myself, and at least how I got into grant writing. I'm a fourth generation farmer, worked on ranches as well. And I really got into grant writing when I got into grad school. Had a professor there at Texas A&M who was probably the best grant writer I've ever met. And he got me excited about it. I've always loved writing, loved storytelling, and didn't realize that if you could combine your love of writing with some operational understanding, which I had just from years on the farm, you could be putting grants together. And I later on was working with the Howard Buffett Foundation in Rwanda, which I was able to see grant writing on the reviewer side, which gave me a unique perspective on, how do we win these grants? What actually goes into the reviewing process? And later on, I started my own farm management company and was able to get up to $500,000, and that's where it all started. And I realized I need to develop a process for getting these grants, and that's what we're going to be talking about today, which is the funding strategy. So I'm excited to give people some tools, and hopefully they can run away with and start maximizing and leveraging funding that's available for them.
Okay, great. So we're going to start just by learning a little bit about our audience. So we're going to have put a few questions for the audience to answer quickly, just so we know a little bit more about them and kind of what their goals are. So Sarah, if you could go through post those 4 questions. The first one about, we want to understand if folks are already farming. Okay, perfect. So if participants could quickly answer these questions, so we get a little feedback on who you are. Okay, great. So everyone take a minute to fill those out. It'd also be great if our webinar participants could add into the chat where they are joining us from. Okay, excellent. So as those results come in, maybe Sarah, once those come in, you can kind of let us know the results of those. But let me just go over the format quickly for what we're going to do today. So I'm going to ask Juan at the beginning some just kind of higher level questions about grants and grants and how to apply for grants and things like that. Then we're going to go into a little case study, little role playing. And then later on, probably the second half of the webinar, we'll open it up to questions from our audience. So I'm sure there'll be a lot of questions. So just to get started, you know, if I'm new to the world of grant funding, let's say I'm planning a farm or operating a farm, I've never, you know, applied for a grant. How can I best prepare my company or my organization for grant funding?
So this is really, I mean, planning is a huge one. And I whenever I'm talking to farmers, we're always planning out our businesses and our finances and everything. It is good to factor in what's available, and that's whether that is NRCS funding or potentially foundation funding if we're working with other nonprofits. And so what I always like to do is let's figure out what registration is necessary for us to even get started. Because I've talked to farmers and they say, hey, I want to get grant funding. Come to find out they're not registered and they haven't talked to an NRCS agent. There's a lot of things that you can do that don't require any writing actually. And for starters, it's talking to your local agent, getting your farm registered on, it just escaped my mind, but what's the registration called? It's I think it's farm, it'll come back to my mind here in a second, but just going through the processes of registering your farm and making sure that you're building a history, that's the best way to start.
Okay, excellent. So, yeah, so if I'm a farmer and, you know, I've been farming for a couple of years, and just, you know, I think some farmers think about grants and they think about like, hey, you know, I kind of want grant funding. Grant funding sounds interesting to me, but I don't know if I want to do like, you know, something totally new and different. So one question I think that comes up a lot is like, can I get grant funding for something I'm already doing at my farm? Or do I have to do something kind of new and innovative or be expanding my farm? Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so, and that's a really good question, right? So when we're looking at really large scale grants, so when I'm doing a, you know, $5 to $10 million grant, it can't just be you doing the normal, you know, run of the mill farming, right? There's some expectations there that you're going to have impact on the community, or you're going to have impact on the environment, positive impact, hopefully. But that's what we have to write about, and we have to do it in a very detailed way that shows that we have a plan. In the case of what funding is available for the work that we're already doing, there's a lot. NRCS had $40 billion put into just that is going out to farmers right now, and that funding, the majority of it is going to be going into things like irrigation, soil management, improved food security on a local level. So there's a lot of things that you're already doing as farmers that you need to be aware of. And that's why opening the doors and having a discussion with an NRCS agent is a good start. Some of that funding is going out to ranchers and the operations that they're running to improve carbon drawdown and also improve the commodity markets. But I think that at this stage, just starting with NRCS is probably the number one area that you're going to have funding for the operations that you're doing right now.
Okay, great. So let's I know we have a lot of questions, but folks, we've just enabled the chat. So if you can, it was disabled at the beginning. So if you can share where you're from, that'll be helpful for us. Or it'll be enabled very shortly.
By the way, the name, so the registration I was talking about is actually FSA. I'm actually going to share a link here so that everyone can use this. It's just a PDF that, let's see.
And folks, we do have, Juan has very kindly prepared some resources for grants, regarding grants that we'll be emailing out to all the participants after the webinar today. So expect those in your inbox sometime later today once the webinar has concluded.
So SAM registration, Andrew, I see that you've asked that question. SAM registration is actually going to be necessary for some of the larger scale funding, but you'll have to check with NRCS. Some funding you may be required to have it. The SAM registration as well as a UEI number. But what I was referring to was actually, and I'm just going to post this here. This is the FSA that we need to register, and most farmers have registered already. They're with Farm Service Agency, but it's just it's for you to document what's going on your farm, and for them and for the government to have an idea of what's going on.
So I think that's important. I've worked with farmers in the past, some who are very organized, others who are quite disorganized. And grants are really, my understanding is that the grants are really about expanding the impact of what you are already doing at your farm. And so one thing that's critical if you want to apply for grants is being organized and keeping records of what you're doing, right? Because when you apply for a grant, right, if you get funded for a grant, the funders want to know what impact their funding made, right? And so being organized, keeping records is critical to that process. So, so if you're a disorganized farmer, it really helps to get organized first, right? Before you apply for a grant.
Absolutely.
Okay. Let's see, we're going to ask a couple more questions, but welcome to folks from, please share where you're from. Looks like we have Juan Lacey from a farm in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Thank you so much for joining us. Others, please share where you're from. We'd appreciate that. Now, Juan, I know I have applied in the past for farms or for grants by myself. Other times I've worked with nonprofits and they've had grant writers. What's your advice for people about whether they can apply for grants on their own, or when is the best time to use a grant writer?
So whenever I have people say, hey, can I do this on my own? I absolutely, I applaud your efforts. If you're going to go for it, go for it. I mean, it's depending on the kind, right? So if we're going to be doing a kind of a small NRCS grant for our irrigation, for instance, and we need some support for that, most of the times you'll actually not need a grant writer. And that might, the NRCS agents might actually help you. I've seen this a lot, and most NRCS agents are going to say, you don't need a grant writer, you can do this, because they try and simplify the process. Now, if we go into a federal grant that's, $250K or more, you probably need some help. And the reason I say that is that if you try and do it yourself, you're probably going to miss one or two things that you just didn't know about. And if you miss those, then nobody even reviews your grant. And so, I mean, unless you're okay with just the learning experience being a learning experience, I always suggest that, look, you get a grant writer because it is a lot of work. I mean, I like to tell people this is very similar to writing up a dissertation in a month's time. So it's a lot of like information you're putting together, except it's got to be, everything has to align. The budget has to align with all the goals, the objectives, and then your narrative has to fit with that as well. So with all that considered, it takes a lot of time. And being farmers, that's time you most likely don't have. So it does help to have a grant writer asking you the right questions to save you that time. But even a seasoned grant writer, if you're doing a federal grant, that can take anywhere from 120 to 150 hours.
So if you really want to like dredge up your nightmares from college and your dissertation that you had to write, right, then
Yeah,
go forward on your own.
Yeah.
But the problem is, like, if you didn't have everything perfect in your dissertation, you'd get a B or a C or whatever and get some advice from your professor. With the grant, it's all or nothing. If you don't have it perfect, then you're out of luck. So different kind of stakes going on.
absolutely, yeah. And I like to tell people, like, this isn't like gambling. Grant writing is very different. You can stack the odds in your favor by just having a solid proposal. But sometimes it does take someone to guide you through that, because, and I wish the first federal grant that I did, I wish someone had, I mean, I did have that mentor, but he really let us go in the deep end and said, look, I'm going to let you guys go for it. And, that's the best way for a grant writer to learn, but I don't think it's the best way for a farmer to learn, because, or an agricultural organization, if you're an ag tech company writing an SBIR grant, probably not the best way to learn, because a grant writer will guide you and teach you the right way. And then after that, if you want to do it on your own, my suggestion is to go with a grant writer the first time, invest in it, and then on your other grants, go for it on your own, because then you have all the templates that you need. You know what questions, how to go about it, how to map it out properly, because I mean, David and I, we were just talking about this, but some of these RFPs can be, anywhere from 60 to 80 pages. So an RFP is a request for proposal. That's like the guidelines for your proposal. And that's just, those are just the rules. So if you're going through 80 pages of rules and you've got to write, 30 or 40 pages, that becomes a lot of work.
And believe me, this is not interesting reading. This, if you're having trouble sleeping at night, begin to read through one of these, and they'll put you to sleep right away. Sarah, do we have the results of our polls? Can you, if those are ready, can you share those on the screen?
Yeah, so the results, I don't know if I can share a Zoom screen within Zoom, but for our first question, are you currently farming or are you planning an operation? Most of our participants are in the planning stages.
Okay.
And for number 2, have you ever received a grant in the past? 12 out of 17 respondents have never applied for a grant. 4 have applied but never received a grant. And 1 has applied for and received grants previously.
Okay, great.
Do you want to pause for a
Yeah.
second there?
No, that's great. Keep going.
All right. So for the third question, what are you looking to fund with the grant money? 1 is looking to fund an existing operation. 3 participants are looking to fund existing operations to serve a new clientele. 4 are looking to expand their current operation. 7 are looking to fund a new venture, and 2 others chose other. So if you would like to expand on that in the chat, feel free. And for our last question, how much grant money do you need? 3 respondents are looking for under 50K. 3 respondents are looking somewhere between 50K and 200K. 11 are looking for anywhere from 200,000 to $1 million, and none are looking for over $1 million.
Okay, Thanks. So it sounds like we have a lot of folks who are kind of new to the world of grants, not super experienced with applying. So great. We're excited that you folks are here to join us, and hopefully this information will be really valuable and get you started on the road to grant funding. So I'm gonna share, we're gonna do a little kind of role play here, where I am a farmer, and let me share my screen, and I'm looking to get funding, and Juan is going to guide me. So, all right. So I assume that folks can see my screen.
Yep.
Okay. So here's my situation is I'm a farmer. I'm located in Omaha, Nebraska. And currently I've been in operation for 5 years, growing seasonal vegetables. I have 3 acres, all outdoor production. And I've been selling at local farmers markets, restaurants, and beginning to do a little bit of home delivery. My farm is pretty small operations, mostly me, but I do employ 2 part-time workers. But one of the big challenges I have is that I'm in Omaha, Nebraska, and it's quite cold for almost half the year. So it's too cold for me to farm half the year, but I really love farming. I'm really passionate about what I'm doing. I'm really passionate about growing food for people. And I really want to expand what I'm doing. And so I want to expand my operation by installing a greenhouse. I have some extra land available. And not only do I want to expand my business itself, but I want to expand the time of the year when I'm producing, because it is so cold during the winter. What I want to do is set up a greenhouse. We have a lot of farmers in my area producing great vegetables during the summer, but in the winter it's so cold, and so we don't get much fresh produce during the winter. Everything's coming from California, coming from Mexico. What I'd like to do is set up a greenhouse, about a 1 acre greenhouse. I used Agritecture designer's tool here to get an estimate for the capital cost. I think, Juan, it's going to cost me about 1.6 million. And I can produce about 250 to 300,000 pounds of produce per year in that greenhouse. And I'm really excited about getting fresh produce, especially to kids during the winter time. And so, I'm an experienced farmer. I've been, producing for 5 years. I have a pretty good track record. I'm pretty organized, but I definitely don't have, this type of money. So what do you suggest for me to get started here?
Yeah, so what we've done here, and this is obviously a case study, and it's what's really exciting is, David, you've thought through who you're wanting to serve. And this is really one of the key areas that when we're looking for grants, because a lot of times people are like, it's all about the money, this is what we want to focus on. But we've obviously broken down, and you have a solid partner, Agritecture, to break down those costs in a really professional way, because you don't have that, you really can't apply for a grant. But starting out, we have some options here. But what I wanted to ask you is, if we were to go and we're now at the stage where we're scoping out this project, what would you say is going on in the city right now that maybe a gap that you're filling? Is there other fresh produce available, or is it really like in the winter there's just the only thing that's available is what's coming from the outside?
Yeah, I mean, it's mostly what's coming from the outside. There are some, kind of storage crops, potatoes and carrots and things like that, onions. But yeah, almost everything's coming from the outside.
Okay. So that's the problem we're solving. Well, there's two problems that we're potentially solving, and if we go in detail, we probably find that in Nebraska, there is a nutrient deficiency in schools. I guarantee it, because it's all over America, but especially in areas where, you know, you're dealing with winters and they're not as close to fresh produce. But even in California, they have, you know, food deserts where they're surrounded by beautiful farms, but the produce just doesn't go to local areas. So I just did a grant that was just like this. So the people that we serve, you talked about, obviously we're talking about local, but to go even further and to hone in on that, we're talking about schools. Now, when we're talking about schools and we're talking about this project, who would we want to partner with to make this a success, right? Because $1 million project, or this is probably what, if we're talking about this, it's probably going to be in the range of, you know, $2 to $3 million that we would put into a project like this to make it a success. Obviously, you can't do everything on your own. Who would you say are some stakeholders that we could engage with to make this successful?
Well, I definitely know, you know, the school district. I have some connections there. You know, they're really concerned about the food that the kids are eating, and they're interested in sourcing as locally as possible. So we can definitely work with the school district, and I know the city council as well. I don't know them personally, but I know that there's been some stuff in the newspaper about wanting to, you know, about health goals for kids, you know, related to things like diabetes and related to things like obesity. So they're interested in, you know, fresher food for the kids. And so those are two partners I think would be very interested. Yeah.
Are there any nonprofits that we could partner with?
Yeah, I'm sure there are. Yeah, I don't have any connections offhand, but I could do a little research and find out who those folks are who are, you know, focused on would I be looking for nonprofits around food distribution or around childhood health? What would you suggest?
It could. So when we're talking about partners, we're talking like we need to think about what are maybe some of the gaps that would exist as operationally when we start to implement the project. And what that could be is, in our case, maybe there's a delivery service or some way, because you're all of a sudden going from, you know, I don't know what you were before, but going to 300,000 pounds of produce is that's pretty insane, right? It's a big jump. So what could happen is that maybe there's a delivery service that they work with local schools or something that might be a for-profit, and that's fine. Or there could be, there could be Food for Kids nonprofit that exists, and we're just making this up. But there's also the potential, like you said, of some organization that's really concerned about the health of the kids. And then we just need to determine, they can either be a partner, an implementing partner, or a partner kind of like the city council. The city council, they're probably really interested in this project. It's solving some of their problems, but they're not going to help you. Other than they might write a letter of support or a letter of commitment, but they're probably not going to be partners that are engaged in any of the agriculture or delivery of the produce. So yeah, so those are the, yeah, go ahead.
Well, what I think you're saying is that I need to, when I think about this project, right, I really think about, instead of trying to do this myself, I should focus on doing the part that I know, you know, growing vegetables myself, or, you know, and then, but really think about who are the partners that I can bring on or work with to make this, to help cover all the different aspects of the project and let that be their expertise essentially.
Right, and there's several benefits to doing that. Number one, all the winning grants that you find, they have solid partnerships. It's just over and over again when I've seen grants that have won, they've had partnerships with universities, they've had partnerships with extension. So I mean, David, we could potentially partner with the university out there, the extension agency, because they do deal with nutrition. And they could support us in potentially some research, or not even research, they could help us with awareness. So they could be teaching parents about the importance of eating fresh vegetables, because the kids, just because we put some microgreens on their plate doesn't mean they're going to eat it, right? So there might be an awareness consideration there. And so when we're building out this proposal, we want to have the perspective of multiple partners. So in the very beginning stages, as we're talking about this, it's important that we start to nail down who can be our partners, who are the most valuable partners, right? We don't want to just have partners that are there because they have big names, but more that they have something to add to the project. The other reason that we want to do this is that when we start writing the grant, they're helpful, right? They start to help with the budget. They start to help with, okay, look, your narrative looks okay, but we're going to add this. And all of a sudden, a narrative that would have been just, 70% at best turns into, 90%, because you've got solid collaboration, and everybody cares in their own way, right? Like some people, you obviously care about the agricultural aspect and producing the food, and what needs to be done with the greenhouse. But we need to have maybe some extension agents that know and understand the relationship between the parents and the kids and the teachers, and understand how to change diets. So we start to get a bit, we want to bring all the expertise in that we can, because that's where you get a solid grant. And this is kind of a bonus, and this is the reason why I always suggest to do a funding strategy in the beginning, because right now, as we're talking about this, there is potential that you could go to the University of Nebraska and say, hey, do you guys have any programs, or is there a way that we could partner together? And they say, actually, yeah, let's partner right now. We have some funding available for this. Or they can say, let's partner, we'll actually write the grant. And then you're just like, boom, perfect. Because then you're doing what like you said, you're doing what you're good at, and you're not having to report to USDA, right? So this, most of the time, what we call this is a fiscal sponsor, but you're not paying for a grant writer, right? So you put me out of business, but that's fine, right? Like we want you guys thinking, how can I strategically do this so that I'm not doing as much work? You can write the grant on your own, or you can be really clever and dynamic and come to the university and say, hey, look, and I'm actually going to show you a grant right now. Just as we were talking, here's what came up. This is, let me share my screen here. So this right here is what came up. USDA announces grants for urban agriculture and innovation production. This hits exactly what you were talking about. Low access markets, urban agriculture. And I think that some of it, on the small scale, it's 50,000, but on the large scale, we can go up to 250,000. And there's 7.5 million available. So this may not get everything that you need, David, right now, but it's a start.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
So, and what I was also going to say is that some of these grants require you to, have a match funding, right? So we're still doing business. We can't just rely 100% on grants. What we need to be doing is like, look, I've got an investor over here, or I have my own money that I'm going to put into this. But if I plan it out properly, 25% of 250,000, that's what I'm going to put into my greenhouses. And then the rest of it will come in, and we'll we'll be able to pay for this, or you pull out a loan and you're able to use that as match funding. There's a lot of options there, but we want to leverage that funding so that you can continue to grow. Now, the reason that I brought up nonprofits is that if you find a nonprofit, when you write this grant, and as we're building out this funding strategy, we're going to find this is just federal grants, right? So a lot of these USDA grants, even if you're a for-profit farm, you can apply for them because they're just made to serve farmers, which most of them are nonprofits by nature, whether they want to be or not. But if we go to, if we look at foundation funding, there's a lot there. And that is more like when we're talking about Bill and Melinda Gates or the Walton Foundation. There's a lot that you can apply for, especially if you're helping kids. But you can't do it as if you're not a nonprofit, right? If you're not a 501c3, you can't apply. That being said, you can partner with an organization because most of these nonprofits have no business doing farming. That's not what they're good at. What they're good at is helping kids. And so if you found a good nonprofit partner, the benefit would be that we could write this grant for this federal, for USDA. And then all that content that we put together, we reuse it. We turn it into something that's, probably a little bit more simplified for a foundation grant later on. Yeah. And this is really the benefit of a funding strategy is that we find we'll need to scope out, 15 to 20 different grants, and then we schedule them so that we're not stressed and saying, oh, it's coming up next week. There's no way you can write a grant, a federal grant at least, in a week. Not a good one.
So I think one thing this kind of discussion reminded me of is just a very basic point is that, like, if you're a farmer and you have an idea for something you want to do, if that idea is in your head, it's not going to get funded, right? Yep. You need to tell the world about it. You need to put your idea down on paper. You can go to, have an interview with the local newspaper and be like, hey, I've got this idea. I'm looking for partners, right? A nonprofit may read that article and be like, oh, this is a great idea. We've been thinking about doing something along the lines of this. And now we have someone who's interested, who we can partner with, and they can write the grant for you, as you said. Yeah. But so critical, get your ideas out there, get your ideas on paper, get them out there, because if they're just in your head, your AI hasn't gotten that good that they're going to the grant fund based on your mind reading. So
right. Well, but I think that you bring up an even more critical point, and I think that if I were to go back to what you brought up, is like, how do I get started? The best way to get started is start building partnerships. You don't even have to have a farm; you just have to have an idea. And it sounds like from the poll that a lot of individuals in this group are in the planning stages, which is fine. You can be in the planning stages, and even actually the grant that and I'll share that grant with everybody, but this grant is specifically also for it's for planning. So there's planning grants, which is crazy. You can get some funding to plan out your project, and then the next year you just get more funding to implement it. So, but in this process, you do need to have solid partners. So doing what David just said, like publicizing your ideas, or just knocking doors and saying, hey guys, you know what? I have an idea. I'm starting, and I'm going to start some aquaculture, or not, some aquaponics farm here in the middle of the city. I know it's going to be crazy, but I'm looking at this restaurant here. I'm talking to the local orphanage, and we're all combining to make this the craziest idea ever. This is the fun part. This is where you guys should be building visions, getting excited. This is what I love about grants the most, is that, like you were saying, David, if you can articulate it, this is not one of those like BS, like, oh, you can do whatever you want, just dream. Like, this is actually, if you can articulate it. And actually that professor I told you guys about, the mentor that probably the best grant writer in Texas, won billions of dollars. He would suggest, look, when we get together, we're just going to draw. If you guys want to go get some finger paint, let's draw it out. And you draw it out and you have a great time with your partners drawing out your project. And then from there, everyone's got a vision and they're super excited. It's the fun part. And you're building some lasting relationships, whether you win the grant or not. It's an important strategy that I see most people don't do. And it will help your business even if you don't win, because you've built these partnerships. You're taking the first steps of getting it done by putting it on paper.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree with you. What was I going to say? So folks, it looks like we have some folks joining us from Orange County, California, Las Vegas, Nevada, Atlanta, Georgia, Kansas City, New York City, Detroit. Excellent. So if you have specific questions for Juan, please post them in the chat and we can discuss some of those. I just want to suggest, like in the past, when I was first starting out, trying to get some grants for my farms and stuff like that, there's some grants that are definitely like much simpler. And so, for example, I was a recipient of a SARE grant, and SARE, Sustainable Agriculture Research and Education, I think. But if you look online, SARE.org, there's like Western SARE for the Western US, Eastern SARE for Eastern US. Anyhow, that's a really good grant to start out with if you've never gotten any kind of funding and you want to try and do it yourself. Any other suggestions, Juan, about easy kind of places to start out for folks who are interested in getting some grant funding?
Yeah, so I mean, the first thing I would start having conversations. Reach out to NRCS. That's another one. There's 3 programs. There's ALE, there's EKIP, which is environmental quality. I'll have to, I think, incentives program. And then there's CSP, which is conservation, soil conservation program, something like that. But those 3 programs have funding available. They're not going to fund everything. What they will do is they'll fund what you're already doing. They'll match it. So you might get, 50% funding for your irrigation, which is insane anyway. Most of these don't require any heavy lifting. I think they're even easier than the SARE grants. So, but you're right. The SARE grants, those are great because those are actually reviewed by farmers. So they're not going to, BS or get worried about like where your commas are, or they just want to know that you have something that's applied research that's going to help other farmers. And exactly. Most of you do, right? Like when you're out farming, you're like, this is stupid. Why have we been doing this way so many years? Like farmers are just inventors and they've got great ideas, and that's what that program's all about. Yes, that's how you spelled SARE. Yeah.
I'll put the link in the chat. Sorry about that. Go ahead.
No, yeah. As far as classic do's and don'ts, Andrew, I think that do set up partnerships. Do come up with a funding strategy in the beginning, right? I mean, you don't have to have a funding strategy to go jump into SARE or NRCS. So do get started, right? Make sure that you're registered. Make sure that you're keeping track of all your records. It pays off in a big way. And I think another thing that's a do look at grants in a different way, right? So many farmers I talk to, they're like, I don't need a handout. And that just bothers me a bit. It just because this isn't a handout. I'm going to say that from, the very beginning. I've done so many of these grants. They help so many people and they do a public service. like David was talking about, feeding kids fresh produce. This would not happen if a farmer didn't get involved. So look at these more like tax write-offs. This is your kind of responsibility, almost like an obligation if you're a good steward of your farm and your finances, that you're applying for these. Now, maybe you don't have to apply for like huge grants, but it's good to at least keep in mind that there are grants out there that can keep you moving in the right direction. I think another do focus on your farm first, right? So don't go bend over backwards to go help kids and bring produce to them if that's going to hurt your business, right? Any grant that you apply for, you should be focusing on your business first. Almost 90% of the grants that I write for private companies, because I believe that farmers and private companies, they take a lot of responsibility and they take a lot of ownership. And I find that nonprofits, they're just kind of relying most times, not all times. I mean, a lot of them are there still running doing things the right way. But if you're running things the right way, you also need to put in perspective that you have to say no to a lot of things. And that's probably also why you need to have good partners. So that's another do. Make sure you have partners. As far as the don'ts, don't go into this thinking it's going to be an overnight thing. It's going to take time, and you do need to give yourself some at least a month or two to really think through this, and then to start building it out. That's how you have a good grant. So don't go running into it, and don't wait till the last week to start applying for a grant. Even if you're a good grant writer, it can always be better. And then don't skip any of the steps. You skip any of them, you're not even going to get it reviewed. Promise. That's just the number one thing. Don't skip anything that they ask you to do. And I find that there's so many farmers that don't follow the rules, even when they make it. Like USDA actually makes it super easy for farmers. They're like, fill out this template. Like they don't even do that with like NEFA grants or some of these other big NSF grants. They just expect you to do it, but USDA will actually create these templates, and farmers will still screw it up. And I understand, like, our minds are everywhere. We're fixing a combine over here, we're doing this, but just make sure that you take the time and you're meticulous about it, because it's worth it. I mean, if you can win 250K, I don't know what else you could do on the farm that would bring that kind of money in. So it's fun. If you take the time and you make it, you really plan it out, it can be a lot of fun.
So folks, we've put in the links in the chat to SARE. So you can just check out that website. They also post all, they want to help farmers. And so they post all the winning grants from all their years in service. So you can read through grants and just see what types of projects have been funded. It's really interesting to see all the different grants that have been funded. There's so much interesting research that's been done, and you can search through their database to see if someone has done a project that's similar to what you're thinking about doing. So it's a great resource. I've also put a link to Juan's website, Stray Acres Consulting. And after the webinar concludes, he has prepared some materials, and we'll email those out to everyone as well.
And I'm also going to share there's a form that I have people fill out. It really gets them kind of brainstorming, but this is not the project planning toolkit, but this is just my form that, if people want to reach out to me, I just have them fill this out so that I know, first of all, who I'm talking to and what's going on in their organization. But yeah, I just copied that link in there. It's also on the infographics that I'll share with you, so that everyone kind of has has everything together in a document. One thing that I was going to point out is that one thing to think about, and I saw in the questions that outside of registering with NRCS and SAM, what are early registrations we should consider? Really, you should consider everything, right? So if you are if you're Hispanic, right, you're underserved community. If you're a woman owning the business, then you really need to be looking at what is there a Women's Farmers Association? I guarantee they have some kind of funding to help you get started. And if not, you can always work with them as a partner for more credibility. It's important to just start reaching out to these organizations, because a lot of them already have funding and they're looking for members. If you're a veteran or any other underserved community, I always say, just start reaching out. The Farmer Veteran Coalition, I've been working with them all this last week. They have insane programs to help farmers. So if you were ever a veteran, now is the time to start looking for funding, because they've got loan programs. They can give you free trainings. They also are looking at, doing some kind of sponsorship programs. I'm working with an organization right now called Operation Regen. They're going to be working with veterans and assisting them in getting started, getting their ranches and farms started. So, and really look and see what you can leverage. If it's, your community, great. If it's, what your background is, there's just so many different things. The partnerships, leveraging that, and then leveraging your resources. If you already have land, then you got a great start. If you got nothing, but you have an idea, then you got a great start, because you can get people around that. So
another good source that I've used in the past they're called specialty crop block grants. Each state, they're done by a state basis, and each state gives millions or even billions of dollars. I don't know. California gives a ton of money every year in these specialty crop block grants, and they are focused on promoting specialty crops. So not the big commodity crops, but specialty crops, more the crops that we grow in urban farming, in hydroponic operations. So check out those grants based on your particular state where you're located.
I just added it, so they've got it now. And then there's also some AMS is a great one. So this is the Agricultural Marketing Service. They have really great grants. There's one that's going to be due in July 11th, that is specifically for organic producers that have a specialty crop. And that one is up to $3 million. So that one is probably the one that we would be looking for, David, with your operation. Like, it'd be perfect. I mean, you wouldn't even have, with a grant like that, you don't have to necessarily reach out to a specific community. It's more just your crops, and it's focused on that. So that's a huge benefit. You still need to have some good partners, but those partners are all about production. And so these marketing grants, I think, are great.
Gotcha. Another good resource is you can always reach out to your local extension agent. I have a really good friend who's an extension agent here with University of California. I'm not in Nebraska, I'm actually in California. And he's always sending me, info about new grants that are coming out, etc. So there's a lot of resources out there, but you got to get your idea out there, tell the extension agent what you're trying to do, and they will definitely keep you in mind. It's the job of the extension agents to be supporting their local farmers. And so if you go to your extension agent and say, hey, this is what I'm trying to do, this is the amount of funding I need, they will definitely keep you in mind. And when opportunities arise, they will definitely let you know about relevant resources. A couple last questions. We only have a few minutes left, but one, if I want to hire you to write a grant for me, but can I pay you on commission? Is that something the grant writers do?
No, I mean, so if you're talking to a professional grant writer, no. Mostly what we do, just if we're part of a grant, if we're part of GPA, which is the Grant Writer Professional Association, or any other association, they require that you sign an ethical agreement that you will not do things on commission. There's a lot of reasons for that, partly because there's, in the past, people were pulling funding from the grant to pay for the to pay the grant writer, which is illegal. And it also made it so grant writers were more likely to go for larger grants, and even when it wasn't ethical, meaning that the person probably wasn't ready for it. There's a lot of issues with it, but the biggest thing that I see, the reason that I do an upfront, like, hey, you're paying for a product, is that this is a product. It's one that you can reuse. You learn the process of writing a grant. Like I said, if you want to only do it one time and you're like, hey, I can do this on my own, this is easy. Great. But a grant writer is, it's very different from other consulting, where there's an actual product at the end that has value. So we normally just do an upfront cost on that.
Gotcha. And I'm sure, based on this webinar, folks are going to be reaching out to you, but you have a limited amount of time. There's a limited number of hours in the day, so you're not going to be able to help everyone. You have existing clients you're working with. How would you recommend that folks, if they're not working with you, find a qualified grant writer? How do they vet, grant writers? What are your recommendations?
So my first recommendation is, if you reach out to me, I will, if I can't help you right now, or if you say, hey, look, your prices are really too high, which, I mean, I do a lot of, majority of my grants that I do are in the 5 million plus range, and I will do some smaller grants at times, but I'm just used to working with really large projects. But if I do keep a lot of grant writers really close to me that do work with farmers and do have similar backgrounds. Some of them are actually coming from agriculture and saying, hey, I actually like this grant writing as well. I have 4 or 5 that I can always connect you with, and and that's probably the best way, is to have a grant writer refer you to another grant writer. So that's, yeah, I have a few that I've won grants with, and I can, they've already been vetted on my end. So, but I would really make sure that you have someone that's giving you sound advice and is listening to you, because this is your story. At the end of the day, if the grant writer is telling you what to do, I mean, I will be pretty clear about what we can and can't do and what our constraints are, but it's your story that I've got to listen to.
Okay, so folks, we're out of time. We will send out some resources to everyone who's registered for the webinar today. This will also be, the recording of the webinar will be available on Agritecture's YouTube channel. But thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Juan, thank you so much for all of your information, and you've been very generous to me and to Agritecture in the past with your time and your information. So we always really appreciate that. And so, yeah, folks, best of luck in your grant endeavors. Please reach out to Juan if you have any questions. Please reach out to me or Agritecture if you have any questions. And hope that this webinar was helpful and informative. And yeah, have a great day, everyone.
Thanks, David. Appreciate it. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.